Good morning. Two Supreme Court decisions, one against doctor-assisted suicide, the second protecting freedom of speech on the internet. They've sparked nationwide debate today, Friday, June 27th, 1997.
From NBC News, this is Today with Katie Couric and Matt Lauer, live from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza.
And good morning and welcome to Today on this Friday morning, everyone. I'm Katie Couric.
And I'm Matt Lauer. Busy day for the Supreme Court. The justices certainly knowing how to make news.
That's right. We're going to spend an awful lot of time discussing those two very interesting and controversial decisions handed down by the High Court yesterday.
Although the Supreme Court ruled against doctor-assisted suicide, they seem to leave the door open for states to write their own laws. We'll get into the right to die debate this morning, and we'll talk to a terminally ill woman who doesn't want the option of physician-assisted suicide taken away from her.
Then, Matt, later we're going to focus on the court's decision to protect free speech on the internet. As a result, how can parents protect their children from pornography? And then a little bit later on, we're going to tell you about a man in Milwaukee who actually got fired for discussing an episode of Seinfeld in his office.
Later in the show, I understand you're telling viewers about wedgies?
Yeah.
Is that it?
The shoe, not the trick you do with people's underwear.
I thought we were going to have to warn children about that.
No.
And then, of course, John Bon Jovi continues our summer concert series right outside in the plaza. The fans are here in droves already.
The natives are restless.
That's what they say. He's going to be performing for us a little later in the show.
And a lot of people are looking forward to that. Clearly, they're here bright and early this morning. So we're going to get to all that and much more. But first, we're going to head to the news desk for Sarah James. Hi, Sarah. Good morning.
Good morning, Katie and Matt. Good morning, everyone. There is fallout today from two major Supreme Court decisions on assisted suicide and internet porn. President Clinton says he'll meet next month with leaders of the computer industry, teachers, and parents to try to find an effective way to shield children against smut on the internet. On Thursday, the Supreme Court struck down a law that had attempted to set moral standards in cyberspace. The court ruled that the law improperly restricted the free speech rights of adults. The nation's highest court ruled on another high-profile case on Thursday, upholding state laws against doctor-assisted suicide. In Florida, meantime, a jury ruled in the case of a physician accused of murder in the death of one of his patients. More from NBC's Kerry Sanders.
Dr. Ernesto Pinzon admitted giving 70-year-old Rosario Guerreri a highly unusual dosage of morphine, Valium, and potassium chloride. But the doctor never said he wanted to kill his cancer-stricken patient. He simply wanted to ease the pain of his suffering.
I was acting just with compassion, trying to help somebody that was dying.
Not guilty. On Thursday, a Florida jury acquitted the doctor on first-degree murder charges. As the Supreme Court was ruling, patients don't have a constitutional right to physician-assisted suicide, the jury in this case was saying the doctor did not commit a crime when his patient died.
It just wasn't conceivable that they could come back with a guilty verdict.
Roy Guerreri's family left the courthouse without comment, but when they spoke to NBC News last year, his wife said her husband never would have wanted to die like this. Potassium chloride is the same drug used for execution by lethal injection.
His eyes were wide open. His mouth was wide open. And he wasn't supposed to die that way.
Despite the acquittal in this case, Thursday's Supreme Court decision could make murder charges against doctors more common. Kerry Sanders, NBC News, Miami.
The commander of the stricken space station Mir says conditions on board have finally stabilized. But there's more to be done to cope with the effects of this week's collision in orbit. Details now from NBC's Robert Hager.
Russian engineers may try today to begin turning back on some of Mir's vital systems. But U.S. space officials warn the situation aboard is still serious. Lights dim, the air aboard sticky, and temperatures swinging from warm to cool and back. This as the Russians are working on a plan to send up an unmanned cargo ship with a repair kit the first or second week of July and begin repairs with a spacewalk in mid-July. NASA's Frank Culbertson says it won't be easy.
Well, I think it's going to be a very difficult job, and I think that it's going to be complicated for the crew.
Meantime, NASA revealed that in the seconds before the accident happened, astronaut Michael Foale and his Russian colleagues were so alarmed they made a break toward the Soyuz spacecraft, the only means of escaping Mir. Only after the impact were they certain they wouldn't have to abandon Mir. Now, the question is, can Mir be repaired? And if so, how well? Should the U.S. continue to send astronauts up for extended stays? Or should the U.S. cut back to an occasional shuttle mission to simply rendezvous and deliver supplies? A decision for NASA to make, based on when and if the Mir can be repaired and how well it can be repaired. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
On Capitol Hill, the Senate is expected to follow the House's lead today and pass a tax cut bill. On Thursday, the House approved the biggest tax cut in 16 years. President Clinton is warning of a real and imminent threat from global warming. Speaking last night at the UN's Earth Summit, he promised a strong commitment to reducing emissions. 7:05 now, time to go back to Katie, Matt, and Al.
All right, Sarah, thanks very much. And we have much nicer weather in this area. The stickiness is out of here.
Is pretty much out of here, although we have quite a bit of warming in our region and throughout much of the country. As we take a look and show you on the satellite, well, a cool front brought much more comfortable conditions to the northeast and mid-Atlantic states, although we do have some more heat firing up later today in the plains, and also looking on into the northern plains. We're expecting temperatures near 100. Strong storms in the northern plains today. Some showers down through the Gulf Coast, on into the lower Mississippi Valley. Everywhere else looking pretty darn good. That's what's going on around the country. Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
Good morning, 7:06 on this early Friday morning. As we get ready for the weekend, skies right now are cloudy, patchy fog, and some haze out there as well. Temperature is 72, humidity at 100%. Quick look at the radar is not going to show you much rain happening. We've got a front that's almost got stationary right over Chattanooga. We're dry right now, a couple of showers out over the Blue Ridge Mountains, but we could see a redevelopment of showers later on this afternoon. Other than that, skies should become partly cloudy, typical summertime day. High temperatures around 86.
It's 7:06. Now here's Matt.
Al, thank you very much. On Close Up this morning, the right to die. As we've been reporting, the Supreme Court Thursday said it's a crime for any doctor to help a patient commit suicide. Dr. Timothy Quill is a doctor who's helped terminally ill people die and whose challenge of the ban was turned down by the court. Dr. Quill, good morning to you.
Good morning.
You were actually one of the lead plaintiffs in one of the two cases considered by the court, so in effect you lost. How big a setback do you think this is for doctor-assisted suicide?
Well, doctor-assisted suicide is not really the main issue here. The issue is how are we going to improve care for all dying patients, improve access to hospice care, palliative care, delivery of such care, and then also how are we going to respond to those few cases where good care fails. So we didn't get a lot of guidance from the court about how they want us to respond to those cases. We got some suggestion how they don't want us to respond, but we still have the same challenge that we had before.
You talk about guidance from the court. The justices did leave the door open for individual states to write their own laws. What do you think will happen on that front?
I think there's going to be a lot of activity at the state level. In fact, the justices very much encourage the debate that's going on in this country, the serious discussion about what kinds of choices we want dying people to have and we want for ourselves and our family members. And I think they really encourage that kind of experimentation. So I think there's a green light right now for experimentation at the state level. And also there was a suggestion in these decisions that even the laws that are on the books might sometimes impose an undue burden on an individual patient, and they might be willing to relook at this issue if such cases came up again.
Dr. Quill, would you be in favor of a situation where an individual state doesn't pass a law allowing doctor-assisted suicide, but says, hey, in the most extreme cases where a patient has tried pain relief methods and they aren't working, and that person is in agony, that we will allow certain guidelines under which a doctor can help a patient commit suicide?
I think we have to develop some kind of predictable process so that a person who ends up in a very hard situation, not responding to usual care, good pain relief is being provided, it's not working in some sense, they have to have a predictable way that they can count on to find an escape. So anything we can do at a state level, at a professional level, that will allow more predictability in this process will be a big step in the right direction.
But isn't the predictability a big problem? Because how do you say one person's pain is severe enough and another person's pain is not?
Well, what we do in the case of stopping life supports, which is another circumstance when we help people die, albeit indirectly, some would say, is that we get our best minds together when we're making this kind of a decision. We get consultations from people in ethics, people in psychiatry, so we make sure we've looked at every alternative and we only make this kind of decision as a last resort. this kind of open decision-making is far better than the secretive, underground decision-making that currently occurs.
But as you know, the Supreme Court drew a line between turning off life support systems. They said if you do that, the disease kills the patient, but if you assist in suicide, a drug kills the patient.
Well, I realize these distinctions are important to many people, but at the bedside for some patients and families who might not have a life support that they can turn off, they don't have a lot of guidance about how they should proceed in that kind of circumstance. So we still have a lot of things to talk about. There's a tremendous middle ground here that we can work together, I think, with the AMA, the American College of Physicians, to try to find as many options as we can.
Dr. Quill, thanks very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dr. Nancy Dickey is president-elect of the American Medical Association, which opposes physician-assisted suicide. Barbara OSKAMP has an inoperable brain tumor. She wants to have the option of physician-assisted suicide. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Dr. Dickey, let me begin with you. The AMA has always come out against doctor-assisted suicide. How do you feel about the Supreme Court's ruling?
We, of course, are excited about the Supreme Court's ruling. It did indeed say that there's a difference between turning off life supports and allowing a patient to die and taking a patient's life. And it also said physician-assisted suicide is incompatible with a physician's role as healer. So we think that it sent the right message, but we agree with Dr. Quill. This now opens a window and gives us an opportunity to do a much better job caring for people who are dying.
But in real terms, Dr. Dickey, do you think that the justice's decision will actually stop people like Dr. Jack Kevorkian and even Dr. Quill, who have assisted in suicides in the past, from performing that service?
Obviously, if people choose to disobey the laws, we have to use whatever we can in order to bring them back to what society has said is the proper standard. But having spent a lot of time talking to Dr. Quill, I think reasonable, thoughtful physicians now have some reassurance that while we want adequate pain relief for patients, that the law of the land clearly upholds a ban on physician-assisted suicide. I'm not sure the Jack Kevorkians of the world would listen to almost any rule, but the real message for patients is that we can take care of the vast majority of pain. And as Dr. Quill said, we must start using the same consultative process that we do for a tough diagnostic problem or a tough treatment problem. There are people who specialize in nothing but pain treatment, and they ought to be available to people who are having difficulties getting pain relief.
Well, you mentioned patients. Let's talk to a patient. Ms. OSKAMP, you have, as I said, an inoperable tumor. I don't mean to ask a blunt question, but it's a difficult subject. What is your prognosis?
It's a terminal illness. In 1991, when I had a lot of radiation, one doctor, guessing the best he could, indicated I might have about 4 years, so I've been very lucky. I have another statement in which the doctor said I had about 8 years to live.
So when you hear these doctors and lawyers, basically they're arguing about your future.
That's the way I feel.
How do you feel? Well, how does it make you feel?
I just feel the need of choice so much because I am fearful about the end. I am more fearful about loss of independence, fearful about great dependence when you can't do anything, get out of bed to do anything, and then fearful about the possibility of a lot of pain. And so when Oregon passed its own Proposition 16, it actually brought a feeling of calmness, of less fear, of peace to me, because I'd have a choice.
It seems as though, according to the law and the way it's going right now, the lawyers and the doctors are telling you that just because you may lose your independence does not give you the right in the law to end your life. But if you're in excruciating pain, there may be some options there. Is that okay with you?
It depends on what the options are. Now, she commented, the person that just spoke, Dr. Dickey, just commented that for pain, pain relief has been developed for the majority of people, but I'm concerned about being in the minority. And again, it goes back to the same issue. I want to have a choice. I don't even know that if doctor-assisted suicide is finally approved and accepted in Oregon, I have no way of knowing what I would want to do at the end. But having the choice just gives this great feeling of relief, of hope. I don't know the words to put it into.
All right, Ms. OSKAMP, stay with us, because on the phone right now is Jeffrey Feiger, who's the attorney for Dr. Jack Kevorkian. Mr. Feiger, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
I understand we have a development that may be closely tied to the Supreme Court decision. A body has been found in a motel in Michigan this morning, and I understand there was a note with that body that said call Dr. Jack Kevorkian or his attorneys. What do you know about that?
I just know that I was retained by the family, and this is a states' rights issue, and what you've been hearing from Miss Dickey and Dr. Quill is just this lip service, this constant nonsense, because what this is about people's rights in the United States not to suffer and not to have government tell us how much we have to suffer before we die. If we have any rights, Matt, at all, we have those rights. And we've been doing that in Michigan for the last 7 years, and we're going to continue to do it. And we don't have to ask permission not to suffer, period.
When you say you're going to continue doing it, can you tell me, did Dr. Jack Kevorkian assist in this suicide, the body that was found this morning?
I could just, what I could tell you is that I represent the rights of suffering people in Michigan, and that Janice Murphy of Nevada had an absolute right to choose to end her suffering when she did. And no amount of intimidation through Nancy Dickey or the compliance with Dr. Quill, who really is not a very good friend of suffering patients, is going to change that.
But the timing of this discovery of this body, Mr. Feiger, would seem to say that someone is trying to send a symbol or a message to the Supreme Court. Did Dr. Kevorkian assist in this suicide?
I think it's a better indication that people continue to suffer every day, regardless of some pronouncement by Justice Rehnquist that we should look back 400 years to decide if people have a right not to suffer in 1997. Mr.
Feiger, if you're saying that you'll continue to do it and you've taken a very firm stand on this, why won't you tell me if Dr. Kevorkian had something to do with that assisted suicide?
Well, put it this way. I've been associated with Dr. Kevorkian for the last 7 years. It's Michigan, and I frankly don't think that Dr. Quill was in Michigan last night. And even if he was, I know he wouldn't help Janice Murphy because he's afraid to, because of the intimidation. There's one doctor I know who's not afraid and who isn't intimidated, and that would be Dr. Jack Kevorkian, who stands up for patients.
Dr. Dickey, let me bring you back in. It would appear that because of the Supreme Court decision, we may see a lot of cases similar to the one we're finding this morning in Michigan. Do you think there will be a rash of symbolic assisted suicides right now?
I certainly hope not, because the message that unfortunately is sent is that patients only have two choices: to die a horrible death or to have physician-assisted suicide. What we want Barbara and all other patients to know is you have choice, including the fact that we will not allow you to suffer, even if it means using enough medication to be put into a coma, which is extraordinarily rarely needed.
Who wants
but
that?
You don't have to end your life prematurely.
Dr. Quill, I understand you're still with us. You'd like to respond?
Yeah, I think what you're hearing right now is the sort of polarizing discussion that is so characteristic of our country right now as we try to approach these complex issues. And the person I would like your viewers really to listen to is the patient, who is really saying that what she needs is a choice. What she needs is some reassurance that if she gets to a bad position in the future, that someone will be responsive, that she can count on that. She may never need that.
Okay.
She may never need it, but she wants to know that it's there, and that's what's absent right now.
Since we should listen to the patient, let me end with you, Barbara. If the option is taken away from you, and it is illegal for doctor-assisted suicide, does that mean that you won't seek out a doctor who will do it behind closed doors?
I would seek out a doctor who would do it behind closed doors. Yes, I've heard that it goes on, it has been going on for a long, long time. It is possible to find someone who sympathizes and understands and will take measures to help the death to come on.
Barbara OSKAMP, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Quill, Dr. Dickey, Mr. Feiger, we thank you as well. It's 7:18. Here's Katie.
All right, Matt, thanks very much. Pete Williams covers the Supreme Court for NBC News. Pete, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Katie.
Let's talk about a couple of other decisions. Congress was handed a couple of setbacks yesterday, one dealing with indecency on the Internet. What did the High Court decide on that, Pete?
Well, a decision that brought music to the ears of people who believe there should be much more freedom in cyberspace than any place else, and the court basically agreed with that. They said the Internet's not like broadcasting where people can stumble onto things. You have to seek it out, and the Internet population shouldn't be reduced to just what's acceptable for children. So they struck down the Communications Decency Act that limited indecent material on the Internet, leaving it up now to these programs that try to block access to software sites in the interests of children.
Were you surprised by that decision, Pete?
Not really. It's interesting, though, the composition of the court on it. You had both the most liberal justices on the court and the most conservative justices together saying this law was a noble idea to protect minors from indecency but it just sweeps too broadly and it just limits too much speech, reducing the adult population to only what's suitable for children.
Let's talk about how they came down on the line item veto.
Well, the line item veto is undoubtedly coming back to the Supreme Court. All the court said is that the 6 members of Congress who felt the law was wrong, and this is a law that allows the president to scratch out anything in a budget that he doesn't like, these members of Congress said, hey, wait a minute, all the president can do is take or leave the whole thing. He can't pick and choose like a menu in a restaurant. The Supreme Court simply said, hey, 6 members of Congress, nice try, but you don't have standing. No president has used this yet. You haven't passed a budget yet. The President Clinton hasn't line item vetoed anything. There's no injury. Come back when you have some actual harm, and undoubtedly they will.
Because the president has said he will be anxious to use the line item veto. When do you think it'll come before the Supreme Court again?
Well,
Hard to say?
It's possible it could come next term, but first the president has to get a budget from Congress, and then he has to use the line item veto, and then they have to gin up the case. It has to go through the lower courts, so another year at least, I'd say.
Pete, real quickly, there's one more decision left to go during this term. What is it?
It's the Brady Law, the 5-day waiting period to buy a handgun, during which local law enforcement officials do a background check on you. The question is, can the federal government force local law enforcement officials to carry out a federal law? 2 western state sheriffs say, no, we don't work for the feds, we work for our states. So we'll see what happens to the strongest handgun control law in the country, and we'll know that today.
All right. Pete Williams in Washington. Pete, thanks so much.
You bet.
It's 7:21. We're back in a moment. This is Today on NBC.